Rick Gilbert's Tuesday started like any other, unremarkable and routine. At 38, he was a dedicated software engineer living in the peaceful monotony of suburban life. His wife, Melanie, a school teacher, had left the house unusually early, claiming she needed extra time for class preparations. Their spirited 8-year-old daughter, Camille, was brimming with excitement about the day ahead, her usual chatter filling the morning air. As part of their daily arrangement, Camille had been dropped off at school by her friend's mother, a habit that always seemed comforting and predictable. By mid-morning, Rick was completely engrossed in his work, finding solace in the steady, familiar rhythm of his tasks. The sudden ring of his phone broke that calm. The number on the screen wasn't one he recognized. He hesitated briefly but answered. The words that followed turned his world upside down. "Mr. Gilbert, this is Officer Livingston. Your daughter Camille has been in an accident. She was hit by a car near her school." The officer's voice was steady, almost practiced, but Rick's heart plummeted. He felt as though the ground beneath him had disappeared. Adrenaline surging, Rick drove to the hospital, his mind racing through every grim possibility. By the time he arrived, the sterile corridors, lit by harsh fluorescent lights, felt cold and suffocating. The sight of Camille, her small body surrounded by an intricate web of monitors and wires, shattered him. A doctor explained, with measured words, that while she was stable for the moment, her condition was critical and could turn at any moment. Camille's fragile state demanded Rick's full attention, but a gnawing unease started to creep into his mind. Certain details about the accident didn't add up, but he chose to push those thoughts aside. His focus had to remain on Camille, whose tiny hand lay lifeless in his. As hours blurred into an agonizing wait, a police officer arrived to gather additional information. Rick assumed this would involve routine questioning about the accident's circumstances, but instead, the officer's words ignited a storm in his mind. "Mr. Gilbert," the officer began cautiously, "the driver of the vehicle claims this was an accident, but there are inconsistencies in his story. We suspect there might be more to this situation." The officer mentioned the driver's name, Kane Roberts. The name meant nothing to Rick, but the officer's tone planted a troubling doubt in his mind. Why did this man's identity matter unless there was something more sinister at play? Rick leaned in, his voice tight with urgency. "What exactly do you mean? Are you saying this wasn't just an accident?" The officer hesitated before revealing more. "We've had reports that Kane was seen loitering near the school multiple times before today. His behavior has raised some concerns." Rick's stomach churned. Who was this man, and why would he be hanging around Camille's school? The officer assured him that an investigation was underway, but Rick couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of a much darker truth. The name Kane Roberts began to haunt Rick. That night, as he sat by Camille's hospital bed, the name looped endlessly in his mind. Each time it resurfaced, it clawed at his sanity. Determined to find clarity, Rick decided to approach Melanie for answers. "Melanie," he began carefully, masking his suspicion with a neutral tone, "have you ever heard of a Kane Roberts?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. For a fleeting moment, her expression faltered, just long enough for Rick to notice. Then, she quickly recovered. "No," she replied, her voice unnaturally tight. "Why would I know him?" Her evasiveness only stoked Rick's suspicions. Something was wrong. He could feel it. But he chose not to press her further, opting instead to bide his time. Later that evening, as Rick paced the dimly lit hospital waiting room, his phone buzzed again. The police had more questions, this time about Melanie. The officer informed him that Kane had been seen parked near their neighborhood several times in recent weeks. Even more unsettling, witnesses reported seeing him speaking with someone who bore a striking resemblance to Melanie. Rick's blood ran cold. His wife. And the man who had nearly killed their daughter? The implications sent him spiraling. Was there a connection? If so, what did it mean? Unable to suppress his suspicions any longer, Rick confronted Melanie the next morning. "I need you to tell me the truth, Melanie," he demanded, his voice trembling. "Do you know Kane Roberts?" Melanie froze, her complexion paling as her composure crumbled. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her voice wavered, betraying her. "You're lying," Rick snapped, his patience fraying. Don't make me find out the truth from someone else. I know he's been around our neighborhood, and I know he's been seen talking to someone who looks a lot like you. Melanie broke. Tears spilled down her face as she buried her head in her hands. I didn't want you to find out like this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kane and we've been seeing each other. The admission hit Rick like a physical blow. He staggered back, his worst fear now confirmed. How long? He managed to ask, his voice hollow. 8 months, Melanie admitted, barely above a whisper. I never wanted to hurt you or Camille. I swear. Rick couldn't believe the betrayal. The woman he had trusted with his life, the mother of his child, had been entangled with the man who had just torn their family apart. Overwhelmed, Rick left the room. The pieces of a horrific puzzle began to take shape in his mind. Could this accident have been more than a random tragedy? Could Kane Roberts' involvement have been deliberate? The questions gnawed at him relentlessly. He knew he had to uncover the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. Rick spent the night drowning in despair, Melanie's betrayal hanging over him like a storm cloud. His thoughts raced endlessly, preventing any hope of sleep. He couldn't escape the haunting question. Just how far did her deceit go? Kane wasn't just some fleeting affair. He was the man responsible for Camille's accident. The connection between the two felt deeper, darker, and far more sinister than Melanie had admitted. The next morning, when Melanie left the hospital under the pretense of getting some rest, Rick saw his chance. Determined to uncover the truth, he rifled through her belongings, starting with her phone. What he found shattered the remnants of his composure. Messages between Melanie and Kane painted a picture of cold calculation and heartless scheming. One text sent a chill down his spine. I can't wait for this to be over. Rick has no idea. Another cut even deeper. We'll finally be free after the school year. Camille will adjust. Rick scrolled through months of exchanges, each one a blow to his already battered heart. They'd been meticulously planning a new life together, discussing finances, and even scouting properties for their fresh start. What froze Rick to his core, however, was how casually they spoke of Camille, like she was just another logistical detail to sort out. Then came the final blow, a message from Kane, sent just days before the accident. We can't keep waiting. Let's just move forward, no matter what happens. Rick's hands shook as he stared at the screen. Was it possible the accident had been deliberate? Had Kane's presence near Camille's school been part of a twisted plan? The idea was too horrifying to comprehend, but the evidence screamed for his attention. Anger, grief, and confusion warred within him as Rick returned to Camille's bedside. She lay still, her small body covered in bruises and hooked up to machines. The sight of her fragile frame broke his heart all over again. Daddy's here, sweetheart, he whispered, holding her tiny hand as tears spilled down his face. I'll fix this. I promise. But how could he fix a situation so broken? His marriage, his family, his very understanding of his life. All of it felt like a cruel illusion. Melanie's betrayal was unbearable, but the thought that Kane might have intentionally endangered Camille was almost more than he could bear. As Rick sat in the hospital's cold waiting room that evening, his resolve hardened. The pieces didn't fit together like a random accident. They felt deliberate. The texts, Kane's suspicious behavior, and his chilling presence near the school formed a sinister pattern Rick couldn't ignore. He picked up his phone and called Officer Livingston, the investigator handling the case. I need to see the surveillance footage from the school, Rick insisted, his voice firm with urgency. It took some convincing, but the officer finally agreed, sensing the desperation in Rick's tone. The footage, though grainy, revealed more than Rick was prepared for. Kane's car hadn't simply passed the school by coincidence. It had been parked across the street for over an hour before the accident occurred. Worse, the footage showed the car accelerating moments before hitting Camille. No swerving, no sign of braking. Rick's stomach twisted in anguish and rage. Kane hadn't just been at the wrong place at the wrong time. He had been waiting, watching, and he had chosen this moment. Fueled by what he'd uncovered, Rick confronted Melanie once more. This time, he wasn't searching for half-truths or shallow excuses. He demanded the full, raw truth. I know Kane was at the school, he said, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. I saw the footage. Tell me what's going on, Melanie. Melanie froze, her face drained of color. She stammered, trying to find a way out, but Rick cut her off. Enough lies, he snapped. I have evidence, and I'll go to the police if you don't come clean right now. Her resistance crumbled. Through tears, she confessed. Kane's been pressuring me, she admitted, her voice quivering. He thought if something happened to Camille, I'd have no choice but to leave you sooner. Rick's breath caught in his throat. You knew? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know he'd go this far, she cried. I swear, Rick, I didn't know. But her words rang hollow. Rick realized that her betrayal went far beyond an affair. She had let a dangerous man into their lives, risking Camille's safety for her selfish desires. The final nail in the coffin came when Rick found emails on Melanie's laptop. In one message to Kane, she had written, Rick's clueless. Just a few more months, and we'll make our move. Camille will adjust. The words pierced Rick like a dagger. Not only had Melanie betrayed him, but she had reduced Camille, his little girl, to nothing more than a pawn in their cruel game. Rick knew he couldn't let them get away with this. The next few days were a whirlwind of action. He collected every piece of evidence he could find. Screenshots of texts, copies of emails, and the damning surveillance footage. He even recorded his confrontations with Melanie. He sought out legal advice, meeting with a family lawyer who was appalled by what Rick revealed. The lawyer assured him he had a strong case for full custody of Camille. Rick also shared his findings with the police. Officer Livingston, now armed with the surveillance footage and Kane's incriminating messages, began a deeper investigation. It wasn't long before Kane was brought in for questioning. Under pressure, Kane confessed. He admitted to deliberately targeting Camille, believing that causing a crisis would push Melanie to leave Rick sooner. His twisted logic was both horrifying and incriminating. The police wasted no time and charged him with serious offenses. In court, Rick presented the overwhelming evidence against Melanie. The judge, visibly disturbed by her actions, ruled in Rick's favor. He was granted full custody of Camille, while Melanie's visitation rights were severely restricted. Though the legal battle had ended, Rick knew the scars would remain. The betrayal, the trauma, and the near loss of Camille had left deep wounds. But as he sat by Camille's bedside one quiet evening, watching her sleep peacefully at last, he felt a flicker of hope. Brushing a strand of hair from her face, he whispered, "We're going to be okay, sweetheart. I promise." Thank you for watching this emotional story of betrayal, justice, and resilience. What do you think of Rick's decisions? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more gripping stories like this. Until next time, stay safe and take care.